Well, as you mentioned to me before starting, I tend to follow in terms of trying to understand how we understand the epistemological approach of Bernard Lonergan, who was a famous Canadian Jesuit, died in 1984, spent many years at the Gregoriana in Rome from about 1953 to 1965, I think, then returned to the United States. He'd gotten cancer, so he was sent him to the States and then lived to 1984. Lonergan's approach is about self-appropriation, which means self-understanding. There's two approaches generally in the scientific method. We can look at human beings externally and say, well, I can see, Mary, James, Peter, Anna, and observe how they act and interact and try and draw some theoretical conclusions. But when it comes to the cognitional structure, every one of us is a human being, and consequently we can use our own cognitional structure to analyzing ourselves, to try and come to a universal grasp as to the structure and nature of human knowing. So if I say Lonergan says, for example, all knowing is based on experience, understanding and judging, which I think is correct, it's also because I have done that evaluation of myself. And I think anybody listening to me is also capable of doing the same evaluations of themselves, their own cognitional structure, to understand what is the nature of knowing. So that's important. One could say, oh yes, Lonergan states this, but in my case I say, no, Paul O'Hara states this based on his own experiencing, his own understanding of himself and his own evaluation and judging of himself and also of the world outside. That's the first thing. So I've already given the basic elements. I think all knowing is based on experience, understanding and judging. Without some type of experience, we don't have anything that promotes the question. The questions arise from our experience. We've got the senses. The senses are filtered through our perceptions. Our perceptions, for some reason, combined with our subconscious, cause us to ask questions. Why is it so? Why is the tree green? Why are the leaves green? Why are the petals pink? Why does the grass grow? What's the meaning of my life? These questions come out of experiences, external experiences like color, or internal experiences. Who am I? Why do I exist? What's the meaning of my life? Both the external and internal experiences promote questions. Those questions are promoted based on desires. For example, we have numerous desires. The basic, I suppose, the real desire for everyone is to be happy, to be complete. And that will take us in many directions at once. Somebody could think, to be happy, I have to become rich and earn a lot of money. They may dedicate their lives only to earning money, only to wanting to get possessions. Somebody else may realize, to be happy, I need some spiritual values. I have to discover the nature of human existence, meaning, and that causes them to grow in the spiritual way and to deepen their own understanding of their own spiritual life, which begins also with understanding cognitional structure. So, in essence then, to fully know, we have to experience, we have to understand, and we have to judge. Now, that happens on many different levels. It's just not as easy as it sounds. Our experiencing can be external and also internal. The dominance of those experiences probably tied in with many, many factors. Genetic, cultural, social, biological. There are many, many factors that, how should we say, influences what we experience. Without eyes, we cannot see. So eyes are obviously clearly important. But also social context. How we perceive something, because even though we may experience many things, our perceptions tend to filter. And through that filtering process, we tend to focus more on something over something else. Why am I interested in knowing about, for example, in my case, theoretical physics? It's obviously tied in with my ability to do mathematics, also tied in with my ability to evaluate, to self-appropriation, but also tied in with my desire to have meaning in my life. And I put together my ability, natural ability for math, and my desire to understand, to probably have tried to understand meaning in terms of theoretical physics, which in the end doesn't fully satisfy me. From there, I use that as a stepping stone to asking higher questions and moving on beyond that. Anyway, the point is, experiences are important, experiences are filtered and perceived, and there's many things that influence that. Many things: culture, sexuality, who we are, family upbringing, education, and so on. But from those experiences, the questions arise. Questions demand answers. We seek to understand. We try to get an insight, grasp the point. Oh, I got it. I've understood. But sometimes what we understand is not correct. And it needs to be evaluated. But am I correct? Is this true? Am I sure I've got a proper understanding? And that too is part of the process of trying to fully understand and to know. So there's true human knowing, experiencing, understanding, judging. And there's also more, I call it basic knowing, animal knowing or intuitive knowing, where we tend to just give names to things. For example, I'm looking at the camera in front of me. I don't have to do a big scientific analysis as what is the camera. I'd see it, oh, there's the camera. There's a table here on which I'm tapping my hand. There's a type of knowing which is common sense based on perceptions. To give to a deeper understanding of what is a table, then I have to do a lot more work. I have to think, well, first of all, how is a table made? What is it made of? What essentially is its function? These are many things that take us into questions, philosophical types of questions, which an animal wouldn't ask. For example, a dog is very good at perceiving, but they're both their sense of sight and smell, perceive things very quickly. We're capable of perceiving too, and that's a certain type of knowing. But the real human knowing is experiencing, understanding, and judging. Maybe you want to leave it like that. Now, again, in that experience, understanding, and judging, there's different variations on that. For example, if I want to understand what water is, I always point it out to my students. For some students, water is just water. It's like, even for, it's that which you use in the morning to wash or to bathe in. You need to drink it to stay alive. Everybody knows what water is. But if I suddenly say, but water is H2O, what do you mean? It becomes a whole different, deeper level of question. Again, the same experience of the experience of water, we wouldn't be asking, what is it, right? I may be happy to say it's water, giving it a name. It's common sense and it's correct. But the deeper question is, well, what's it made of? And then you have to enter into the science of chemistry and also maybe know a little bit about physics, but primarily chemistry. You say water is H2O, but what does that mean? It's more than just the name of saying, it's not just a substitute for the name water. Water is H2O. You could think H2O is just synonymous with water. But if somebody's a scientist, it has a much deeper significance. They grasp a relationship between hydrogen atoms and oxygen atoms and relationship among themselves. So this intrinsic relationship of conjugate forms, of conjugate relations, independent of me, even though I'm grasping them, but the point is those relations are there, intrinsic, allows me to enter into this scientific way of knowing. So to know something scientifically, I try to grasp these intrinsic relations within things that relate, bodies or things to one another, that allows me to grasp something more scientifically. And then I do need to confirm that it's true. I mean, water is H2O. It's not H2O2, which would be hydrogen peroxide, which also exists, but it's very, very different. So one has to do checking, or it's not H3O, which doesn't exist. Somebody might say, well, I'm going to call water H3O. Okay, call it H3O, but de facto, and no chemist in the world would accept that, right? or laws of gravity. I want to understand how, the planets go around the sun, and we discovered Newton's laws give you an inverse square law of the gravity. In other words, the distance from the two objects, the force of attraction is 1 over r squared, the distance between the two centers of mass. If you change that r squared to r cubed, you couldn't have gone to the moon and back, right? You won't be able to predict the seasons, you won't be able to predict eclipses and so on. So that understanding of r squared is a mathematical property, but it's also a real property. And that has to be confirmed, and it's confirmed and checked and rechecked by our yearly ability to predict our calendar, our seasons, eclipses of the moon with the earth and with the sun, sending people to the various planets. It's just many confirmations, but it does take that. Okay, so there's a scientific knowing, but it's still based on the basic experience. We're all living on a world where we're on this planet which is mysterious. We see a sun in the sky, which has provoked us to ask the question, what is the sun, what is the earth, how are they related? And it took centuries to go beyond the experience, to grasp, not only ask the question, but ask the correct question that eventually allowed us to grasp the correct formula. And that becomes through education and training. It's not something that's spontaneous. The question can be spontaneous. Finding the answer takes a lot of work and a lot of research and checking. And that tends to be the scientific way to know, as in contrast with the common sense way of knowing, which is equally valid, not less, but common sense tends to give names to what you experience. The scientific method takes the same experience and asks a deeper question and realizes it has to do more work to come to an answer, and then has to check the answer by affirming, yes, this is true, yeah, it's not true, and so on. Now, of course, once you use the word truth, people say, oh, how can we ever know what is true? Without going into whole lessons of philosophy, I would say those questions are contextual. In other words, I want to send you to the moon and back. I know Newton's law of gravity works at this stage, so that's all I need to use. Whether the Newton's law of gravity is universal in the sense it could be replaced by a theory of relativity, can be, or how they're related are deeper questions. But it doesn't detract from the simple context. To send you to the moon and back, the inverse square law of gravity works, right? And it's true in that context. Where a 1 over cube law wouldn't work is false, okay? You asked a deep question. First of all, I'm going to give you an answer, both from a Lonergan's point of view, from an epistemological point of view, but also I would also add in the element of faith, my Christian faith. I am a Christian, so will have an impact. But just basically, before we get to the level of faith, I would distinguish about how a computer learns or a robot learns and how I learned. The simplest way is to look at the IBM computer, which was set up, I think in the, I've forgotten the years, 1970s or 1980s, when it was programmed to play chess with one of the grandmasters, Kasparov. Now, when Kasparov played the computer, and finally the IBM supercomputer was able to beat Kasparov, it didn't beat him in every game. They had a series of, I think, 6 or 7 games, 6 games, I think. And based, how chess works, that if you win, you get a 1. If you lose, you get a 0. If you draw, you get a half. I think that's how it works. At the end, the score was 3.5 to 2.5 in favor of Deep Blue, or was it Deep Throat or Deep Blue? I've forgotten the names of the computer. You can check it. That was played off against Kasparov. Now you could say, wow, so the computer finally beat the human being at chess, which is true. Or not, well, it could beat me probably any day of the week in chess. I haven't played chess in so many years, but somebody like Kasparov, who was a grandmaster and the world's best in that moment, was finally, if you like, beaten by a computer. But there was a huge difference, which says everything. Kasparov could look at the board from his own based on his learning and his education and constant practicing and playing chess for years, but he could look and say, oh, this is the best move. At least he had an insight, what we call, oh, I got it, insight. He didn't do any calculations. Every move that the computer took against Kasparov, if I remember correctly, again, I can be corrected, you can Google it and check, but I'm almost sure it did something like 300,000 calculations per second to decide how to respond to Kasparov. As you know, in chess, there's a couple of you're allowed a couple of seconds or a certain period of time to make your moves, and then you have to see to your opponent. Every second, the computer made 300,000 calculations. I'm sure Kasparov didn't make even a single calculation. So the computer didn't have insights like Kasparov. It was very different. It's programmed to use algorithms. Now, the people who programmed the computer had insight. That's very different. Nobody's denying the computer wasn't programmed intelligently. It was programmed by human beings to use algorithms which work very, very fast. I can use the same algorithms myself to do calculations, but there's no way I could ever do 300,000 calculations in a second. It's just, I'm not capable of it. And in that way, the computer could be seen as superior in the sense that it's faster at doing calculations. However, think about it, the computer is a very different machine, or the robot is too. Its calculations then was, from the mutual calculations, it chose one that was optimal based on probabilities, based on the most probable outcome, because you're trying to anticipate future advances. It took its next move, and in fact, it turned out, in most cases, it was probably the best way. The computer simply was programmed to do very quick calculations based on algorithms, mathematical algorithms. The ability to have an insight to say, I got it. The eureka, that experience of Archimedes when he was posed the question by the king, is this crown that I've been given or purchased really made of gold, which it's meant to be? Is it legit? The moment that Archimedes was posed the question, he didn't have an answer. He hadn't even got a law to base it. He had to discover a law, and he discovered taking his bath. He went into his bath, probably having thought for a couple of days or hours. I don't know, the historians don't tell you how long he was working on the problem, but there's a certain moment he goes down to relax, and as the water shoots out, Eureka, I got it. The insight. He understood, he discovered what we now call the law of specific gravities, right? Something is weighed in air and then in water it loses some of its weight. The loss in weight is equal to the amount of water displaced. He realized every single substance, every material on earth would have its own specific gravity. So if something was pure gold, it'd have a specific gravity connected with gold. He got a piece of pure gold, got its specific gravity, then got the specific gravity of the crown. If the crown was same as the gold or very close, he knew it was basically gold. If the value was very different, he knew it wasn't gold, so he could let the king know whether the crown was made out of gold or not. But the idea was the insight. I got it. The computer would never get that insight. I could program the computer to use the laws of specific gravity, but the computer, no amount of calculations would ever give it that insight. Knowing the law, it can do calculations. But without that law, the calculations don't come. It would be just myriads and myriads and myriads and myriads of calculations of weights and whatever, but no unifying principle. And that unifying principle is the insight. The computer has a unifying principles because we as humans have programmed it to have certain unifying principles that we wanted to have based on our algorithms, but which has potential to do things that are probably we didn't foresee, but it's still based on our unifying principles. So that would be the first thing. I'd say there's a huge difference between robotic knowing and human knowing, between artificial intelligence and human intelligence. And then there's the divine spark. What is the nature of insight? It doesn't matter. It's instantaneous. But even then, there's the divine spark. These, as Christians, we're taught, and also Jewish tradition, we're made in the image and likeness of God. The computer is not made in the image and likeness of God. It's made in my image and likeness, the human image and likeness, which is not the same as the image and likeness of God. So we can get any robot to probably assimilate a lot of human characteristics with voice, ability to think or to act, but you put a lot of effort into programming it to do that, and it's always assimilation. It's always an approximation. It's never the same thing. It's similar, but similarity or analogous doesn't mean equal, right? So when we produce a robot that looks like a man or a woman or a pretty man or a handsome man or a pretty woman, that's based on our intelligence and abilities and aesthetics and for it to do what we want it to do. And so at the end, the underlying principle that guides a lot of artificial intelligence is based on human decision-making and actions and morals and ethics. You know, if you create a robotic soldier to do killing, well, it's the human beings have created the soldier to do killing. If you create a robot to somehow babysit our child in a certain way, which will never really do it, never be able to tender it, but even if you do, it'll do it in a way that has been programmed to do. So I think there's no comparison. No machine will ever match up to a human being. I think the difference between artificial intelligence and human being is much greater than the difference between a human being and an amoeba. But there's just no comparison. It's a different type of question. It's a different type of... It's a machine. Moreover, a machine is not conscious. Consciousness is that awareness of self that one has in the cognitional acts. It's an experience of self. Consciousness is not knowing. When we know, we are conscious. When we're understanding, we're conscious. But the consciousness is the experience of self in the acts. I would have no sense that any computer robot is conscious. That would be my own take. You can have it to simulate consciousness, but you can ask a question. I could even ask my cell phone a question. I could say, who are you? And it'll give me a name. Do you believe in God? I think IBM, was it IBM? Not IBM, the Microsoft had its artificial... what's the modern day when you ask, you go in and you have the names they have for you have a device in your room, and you just say Alexa. Okay, so I'm looking at Alexa. How old are you? And it'll give you an answer. I'm not programmed to give that age, or I'm in the metaverse and there's no answer to that. Do you believe in God? Again, it'll give you an answer it's programmed to give. Where for us, it's not a question of meaning. It's a question of being programmed to give a response. I say I will worry about whether human and artificial intelligence can be a human when I see a computer that wants to commit suicide. When it gets depressed, it needs an antidepressant to pull it out of its dire state of existence. Or we just don't associate those questions with robots. This idea of suicide, depression, or even happiness. You could say, are you happy? And I guarantee you the response we'll give will be purely response that has been put into it by a computer. You can always fool it. So to me, the questions is the machines are there to help us. They're created by humans, made by humans, and they can be used for good or bad. And they can be used to do a lot of good, but it can also be used to do a lot of bad and create a lot of things that we shouldn't be doing. Obviously, in the biblical approaches, men and women they were created as one, male and female. He created. First of all, he created, in the English they call it man, but that's a bad, because the English language is deficient for that word. If you ask somebody, a Hebrew scholar, he created the human being, which then became male and female. So it's human being, male and female is the distinction. And so it's a distinction within being human. And obviously when Adam first saw Eve as, flesh of my flesh, bone of my bone, and there was a completeness which he did not have by simply knowing the animals and giving names to the animals, which is just as suggested in Genesis. So it's very important. Male and female are both human beings, and in that way are infinitely loved by God and have an infinite value. And both as human beings, male and female, we're all mysteries to ourselves. At least I'm aware as I grow older that the more I get older I get, the bigger I am a mystery to myself. And I think that's probably true of male and female together. So there's differences, biological and probably also psychological, but difference is complementary and beautiful. I don't see it as a problem. I just think my mother and father, how different they were. I loved my mother. I'm happy that she was my mother, not my father. Just as I was happy my father's my father, not my mother. So it's like saying, I'd like an apple and do I like oranges? They're both fruit. I love both of them, but they're different. But no, an apple is not an orange. Male and female are both human. So they're infinitely loved by God, infinitely respected, infinitely and complementary. So that would be the first thing. Then the same could apply to a culture. I mean, I lived for 2 years, about 50 years ago in the Cameroon, and there wouldn't have been the same technological development as there would have been in Europe at the time, and even more so in the United States. You can still see it in different countries and different social milieus. There's a big difference in, who has computers, who has cars, who has the internet, who doesn't have the internet. And that's obviously going to be a factor. There's many factors in that. So cultural, social, economics, ability to... don't all have the same intellectual abilities. We all have the ability to say, but you said all knowing is human experience, understanding and judging. It's correct. But the pace, some people do it faster than others. Moreover, the quality of the experience changes. Experience, in my opinion, is based on interest and social factors and sensitivity. An artist, if you've ever been around an artist, male or female, their response to colour and to sounds or their music can be very different to somebody who doesn't have that sense, that talent. They respond to what stimulates them, right? So maybe how male and female both experience, both have insights, both need to reflect if they fully understand. How they experience might be different, but even between male and females may be different, but actually between males and males and between females and females it's different. That's a study that would really need to be studied further. It's just not clear, how much is the biology involved, the genes involved, the social factors involved, the cultural factors involved. I can't say. You'd need to do a lot more study on that. But there's clearly certain differences, right? And I don't see it as bad. I just think different. What's wrong with difference? Apples are not oranges. I like both. So that would be the first thing. And then obviously education would be a huge factor. Another thing I've often noticed, people say, but the whole distinction male and female is, male way of thinking, female way of thinking. I now live in Italy. Before this, I lived for 34 years in the United States, and I grew up in Ireland. I sometimes find the cultural difference between, it's not male and female, is for me at times the biggest difference. It's just the cultural difference sometimes come from more Anglo-Saxon world, having lived for 34 years in the United States and before that in Ireland, can for me be very different culturally and socially to the ways of thinking and acting than the difference between male and female. So that there would be factors to be put in. So at the end, I don't know if I've answered your question, but you did. There's a lot in your questions, and they would take a lot of research. But I think difference is beautiful, so I don't see it as a problem, right? So you know. Now, obviously, difference in this. Now, there's things difference in the quality in terms of recognizing the equality. Now, quality doesn't mean we're all the same. There's a quality of being of the beauty of being human. Obviously, if there's social injustice, you have to work for it or against it. You know, you want to alleviate poverty. You want to, everybody has a right to education and give them an education. But they're not all going to turn out to be mathematicians. I've taught math. I am a mathematician. I did a PhD in math. My fascination has been theoretical physics. And I just can tell you from experiences, not everybody has that ability. No more than an example, if you see me in my framework, am I going to be a great basketball player? I don't have the physique or the ability to play basketball well. It's not going to happen. I just accept it. I'm not in crisis over it. I've no interest in playing basketball well, but I'm also realistic, right? So I can't go around and demand my right to be you know, to play basketball like everybody else. Well, I can demand a right, but let's be realistic. It's not going to happen. And I think the same, I've seen it with, you know, teaching mathematics. Not everybody has the same ability with mathematics, whether male or female. And I've seen that throughout most areas. It's in terms of the sciences. Some people say, but you know, there's more men in the sciences than there are the women. Well, actually, in my experience, at least growing up in Ireland when they set up the education system, and there was, you know, it's very competitive. There was much more women going into medical school in Ireland than men, because the girls were doing a lot better in the final exams from the schools, and they were going to medicine. There were probably more men going into engineering type subjects and mathematics, but they're not just fully men, not only men, they're also women. There was a higher percentage, but there were a higher percentage of women going into medicine and the biological sciences. So to me, it's a trade-off. I mean, I don't see any disadvantage in having more women doctors than there are male doctors. Or, you know, in fact, maybe I associate more empathy as a female quality is more natural in women to be empathetic to their patients and have better bedside manners than maybe a guy who would have to acquire it. It wouldn't maybe not come as natural. But even then, I'd be careful and say maybe it's natural, maybe it's not. It depends on also family upbringing, social demands on a person, right? Research needs to be done there.